fans are shocked by David Attenborough's recent, tragic confession. He has been the unwavering voice leading the world through the most remarkable tales of nature for a number of decades. But as he gets closer to 100, the reality of his health, his hardships, and what he's finally acknowledging indicates that death may be closer than we realize. A final plea that is more passionate and urgent than anyone anticipated is at the heart of it all. Childhood and ascent to prominence. David Attenborough is regarded as the voice of nature on a global scale. A serene presence that leads viewers across icy tundra, into the hidden lives of species that most people are unaware of, and into the depths of oceans. However, behind that well-known voice comes a guy whose path was molded by a lifetime of struggles that never made headlines. And now that he is getting close to 100 years old, the most recent information about him carries a burden that is very devastating. David, the second of 3 sons in a family with a strong educational background, was born in Isleworth, London, on May 8, 1926. As the principal of University College in Leicester, his father, Frederick Attenborough, created a home full of books, ideas, and a never-ending curiosity in the world. David was surrounded with compassion lessons growing up. The Attenborough family actually took in refugee children during World War II who had fled the terror sweeping over Europe. David's perspective, sense of responsibility, comprehension of global adversity, and realization that life encompasses much more than personal comfort were all shaped by his early encounters. David was motivated by these encounters to pursue an academic career that connected his passion for the environment with music. He thus attended Clare College in Cambridge to study natural sciences, with a focus on geology and zoology, and graduated in 1947. He gained a scientific discipline from this instruction that would later characterize his narrative technique. Nature was never viewed by Attenborough as magical or remote. He perceived it as a world ruled by logic, structure, and intricately linked systems. Every documentary he ever narrated would be built around his scientific expertise. Attenborough had a brief stint at an educational publishing business prior to going into broadcasting. He began one of the most significant careers in television history in 1952 when he joined the BBC. He didn't intend to become an on-screen character at the time. Instead of participating in shows, he anticipated working behind the scenes, producing and directing them. However, the BBC soon acknowledged his vast knowledge, poise, clarity, and intelligence in each assignment. In 1954, he made his first significant breakthrough with Zoo Quest, a television program that fused travel, natural history, and an entirely new spirit of adventure. Viewers were captivated by the show's inventive technique and Attenborough's serene demeanor. For the first time, viewers were witnessing exotic species in their native habitats under the guidance of a scientist who communicated the science as naturally as he breathed, rather than just reading about them. Attenborough's career was revolutionized by Zoo Quest, which also signaled the start of a new age in wildlife broadcasting. However, Attenborough's impact went well beyond just giving presentations. He was at the heart of one of the most innovative eras in BBC Two's history when he was appointed controller in 1965. His daring, unorthodox shows, such as Monty Python's Flying Circus, the art series Arena, and a plethora of documentaries on science and culture, revolutionized British television. In ways that persisted long after he resigned, his leadership placed a strong emphasis on experimentation and increased the BBC's reach. Attenborough chose to return to presenting his actual calling despite his success as a CEO. More than 500 million people watched the groundbreaking natural history series Life on Earth, which he released, music, in 1979. By fusing science, narrative, and worldwide exploration on a scale never seen on television, the project established a new benchmark for wildlife filmmaking. Attenborough's life and the entire natural history broadcasting industry were transformed by the series. Each of the subsequent titles pushed the limits of what might be accomplished in wildlife documentaries. Attenborough did more than only record the natural world. With a degree of care and detail that influenced generations of viewers, he unveiled it piece by piece. He received numerous BFA Emmys for his work throughout the years, as well as a distinguished knighthood in 1985. His honesty and clarity made his voice instantly recognizable. But beneath the fame, the honors, the awe, and the comforting serenity, there were hardships that molded the man that the public came to adore. difficulties that he discreetly carried far from the camera that gradually gathered after a lifetime of recording the beauty and devastation of the globe. Battles behind the celebrity. Although David Attenborough seems to be impervious to criticism, the reality of his extraordinary career is much more nuanced. His body and mind are still affected by the years of investigation, the miles of travel, and the hardships he faced. Attenborough visited some of the most hostile places on Earth for more than 70 years. He shot in cold winds, monsoon rains, scorching temperatures, and impenetrable woodlands where he had to be careful at every turn. His documentaries were influenced by these settings, but they also put constant strain on his joints. The years of climbing, squatting, and negotiating rough terrain finally caught up with him by the early 2010s. He had a knee replacement in 2015, a significant procedure that calls for months of meticulous rehabilitation and a lengthy recuperation. The procedure demonstrated the physical toll of a lifetime of pursuing the most outrageous tales in the world, frequently without taking into account how taxing it was on his body. However, the burden was beyond his physical limitations. Attenborough became more conscious of the potential for cognitive deterioration as he grew older. He has admitted in interviews that his biggest concern was losing his independence, his lucidity, and his capacity to express the natural world in the same way that he always did. He was worried about losing the ability to perform the tasks that had defined his identity for so long, not about aging per se. However, the most significant event in his career may have occurred early on, long before he rose to fame. While filming off the Great Barrier Reef in 1957, it occurred. An early version of Jacques Cousteau's open-circuit diving helmet, which is still in the experimental music stages, was being tested by Attenborough and his group. There was a problem. His suit's air pressure fell, making it difficult for him to breathe. He later recalled the moment vividly, saying, "When I put mine on for the first time, I suddenly felt water coming around my chin and up over my mouth. I thought, this can't be right. And by the time the water rose to my nose, I thought, I'm sure this is not right. But then, of course, if you get this thing screwed on top of you, you can't breathe. You can't even make yourself heard. The malfunction could have been fatal. And he had only seconds to react. He managed to surface in time, but the close call stayed with him for the rest of his life. It was one of those rare moments when the dangers of film became painfully real. A reminder that documenting the natural world required more than curiosity. It required genuine risk. Attenborough spoke about this incident again during a 2025 conversation with Prince William while promoting a major ocean documentary. Even after nearly 7 decades, the memory still carried the weight of what could have happened. It was a reminder that behind the calm narration and measured delivery were experiences that shaped him in ways viewers rarely understood. These challenges never deterred him from his work, but they did shape the man behind the legend. The constant travel meant long stretches away from home. The extreme environments left their impressions on his body, and the fear of losing his clarity weighed on him more than public audiences ever saw. And while the world sees a man defined by his achievements, there is another chapter that shaped him just as deeply. One of personal loss, grief, and the emotional cost of a life spent mostly in motion. Tragic loss of wife. David Attenborough's marriage to Jane Elizabeth Ebworth Oriel was a partnership that shaped nearly half a century of his adult life. While their union was not widely publicized or built on glamour or the rhythms of celebrity culture, it was definitely rooted in stability, shared values, and a deep respect that endured through decades of change. They tied the knot in 1950 at St. Dan's Church on Kew Green, a modest ceremony that set the tone for a relationship unmarred by the spotlight. Jane was from Merthyr Tydfil, Wales, and unlike many spouses connected to public figures, she chose a life far removed from cameras or attention. Her world was quieter, built around home, children, and the supportive role she carried with unwavering steadiness. Attenborough's career required long stretches away, but their relationship absorbed the distance with a kind of resilience that few couples could manage. Together, they raised 2 children. Their son Robert became a lecturer in biological anthropology, continuing the family's long connection to scientific inquiry, while their daughter Susan pursued education, eventually serving as a headmistress, shaping the lives of students with the same calm discipline her parents modeled. Despite their father's growing fame, both children grew up largely shielded from publicity, grounded by the normality Jane maintained at home. For over 47 years, their marriage stood as the anchor around which Attenborough's demanding career revolved. It was Jane who managed the household during his long filming expeditions. Jane who kept the children secure through endless relocations, uncertainties, and late-night calls from distant corners of the world. And Jane, who gave Attenborough the emotional foundation that allowed him to travel, return, reset, and begin again. But in 1997, everything changed. Jane suffered a sudden brain hemorrhage, a medical emergency that struck without warning, and left no time for preparation. Attenborough rushed to her side, returning from filming as quickly as possible. But the event unfolded with a finality that no amount of experience or composure could soften. Her death ended their nearly 5 decades together in a moment that felt brutally out of rhythm with the life they had built. Attenborough later described the impact simply saying her death left him lost for a man known worldwide for clarity, direction, and steady narration. The loss dismantled the center of his private world. The timing added another layer of difficulty. His children were adults by then with their own careers and responsibilities. But grief does not respect independence. It reshaped the family, creating a space where her presence had once been constant. Professionally, the loss fell during a period of intense creative work. Attenborough had documentaries in progress, commitments to networks, and filming plans that required travel. Yet, even in the shadow of his grief, he returned to work, not because it was easy, but because he understood the rhythm of his life. The natural world had always been his refuge, the place where he regained perspective in the face of personal turmoil. Continuing to work did not erase the pain, but it offered structure when everything else felt unsteady. Balancing this grief with his career was one of the quietest struggles of his life. For decades, Jane had been the constant point he returned to after every expedition. Without her, the process of traveling, filming, and narrating took on a different emotional weight. Every departure meant returning to a home that no longer felt the same. Every achievement came without the private celebration they once shared. Attenborough is not someone who speaks openly about personal hardships, but those close to him noted how deeply Jane's absence shifted his sense of grounding. Yet even through the pain, he honored her memory by continuing his work with the same integrity and dedication she had supported for decades. In the years that followed, Attenborough's documentaries began to reflect a subtle but undeniable shift. His tone grew more urgent, his warnings more pointed, and his focus less on spectacle and more on preservation. Many viewers felt that his personal loss deepened his connection to the world he documented, giving his voice a new emotional undercurrent. And as he stepped into this next phase, he placed his focus more on his public advocacy, the campaigns he championed, and the global movements he helped inspire. Public advocacy and campaigns. David Attenborough's influence has never been limited to television. As his documentaries reached global audiences, he became a central voice in the discussion about the planet's future. For decades, he has carried the responsibility of translating complex environmental science into language that ordinary viewers can understand. A task he approached with the same clarity and respect that defined his storytelling from the beginning. His advocacy intensified as the world began confronting the realities of biodiversity loss and global warming. Attenborough understood that the camera could capture beauty, but it could also capture disappearance, melting ice caps, shrinking forests, and collapsing ecosystems. And so, the distance between entertainment and warning, music, narrowed. He began using what started as natural history as a global environmental message. In 2021, he was named the People's Advocate for the United Nations Climate Change Conference, a role designed to inspire international cooperation and public involvement. It was an acknowledgement not just of his authority, but of the trust he had earned over a lifetime. Attenborough's task was simple in description, but enormous in scale. Motivate the world to act. His presence helped frame the conference in human terms, reminding leaders that climate change was not an abstract political issue, but a growing threat experienced by communities, wildlife, and generations to come. That same year, he addressed the UN Security Council, warning with directness that climate instability was becoming one of the greatest security challenges of the modern era. His tone was measured and the weight of his message was unmistakable. Attenborough did not speak as a politician or a theorist. He spoke as someone who had watched the world's natural rhythms shift over 7 decades of first-hand observation. Throughout this period, his personal life remained under scrutiny. As a global figure, he faced the pressure of being seen as the voice of nature even while navigating aging, health concerns, and private grief. Audiences expected consistency and expected him to appear calm, wise, and confident. But holding that role through personal vulnerability has been one of the quiet challenges that shaped his later years. Despite the demands placed on him, Attenborough continued to advocate for renewable energy, reduced consumption, and biodiversity protection. His voice is a bridge between scientific communities and the public, offering explanations that feel accessible without oversimplifying the urgency of the issues. In 2024, his advocacy extended to local conservation efforts, including his support for the Wildlife Trust's Rothbury Estate campaign, an ambitious project aiming to raise £30 million to protect more than 9,500 acres of land in Northland. The campaign reflected his long-standing belief that conservation must happen both globally and locally through grand international agreements and through decisions made in individual communities. Film has remained his most powerful tool. Attenborough consistently used documentaries to make environmental science easily understandable to millions who might never read a scientific report or attend a conference. Through film, he showed the patterns beneath the surface. Coral bleaching, species decline, changing weather systems, and disappearing habitats. His work did not simply present facts. It connected them to reality, urging viewers to recognize the consequences of inaction. Yet, even a figure as respected as Attenborough could not escape criticism. His advocacy, while widely praised, also drew pushback from groups who questioned his views, challenged his messaging, or misinterpreted his intentions, controversies, and scandals. As David Attenborough's influence grew, so did the scrutiny surrounding his work. Many of the controversies he faced were not traditional scandals, but debates about responsibility, accuracy, and the delicate balance between storytelling and science. Or someone whose legacy rests on trust. Even minor disputes became amplified, especially in an era where environmental issues are politically charged. One major controversy came from how the BBC handled impartiality. When Wild Isles was released, reports claimed that an episode focusing on how humans damaged the environment was kept off regular TV to avoid political arguments. The BBC said the episode was always meant to be online only, but the accusation spread quickly. Some critics felt that leaving it off television downplayed the seriousness of environmental damage. Others argued the BBC was simply following strict rules about staying neutral. The debate showed how difficult it can be to talk openly about science inside a large institution that must avoid political bias. Attenborough also became a target of climate change denial groups. They questioned his explanation of wildlife decline, especially his coverage of walruses in the Arctic. These groups claimed he exaggerated the effects of climate change, even though scientific research supported his statements. Unfortunately, the claims spread across social media, confusing viewers who didn't know how to separate misinformation from scientific fact. Attenborough rarely responded to these attacks. He chose to stay focused on evidence. But the incident showed how even accurate science can become a target in modern public debates. But it didn't end there. He faced even more criticism after speaking about population growth and how rising human numbers put pressure on the planet. His point was based on long-term environmental trends. But some people felt the explanation didn't fully capture other major causes like unequal use of resources or industrial pollution. Others agreed with him, saying the issue was important to address honestly. There have also been questions about his wildlife filmmaking ethics. Music. From time to time, critics pointed out that some scenes in nature documentaries are filmed in controlled settings when capturing them in the wild is almost impossible. This practice is common in the industry, and production teams usually explain when it happens. Still, misunderstandings occur, and some viewers felt unsure about which scenes were completely natural. Attenborough's goal has always been to show true animal behavior, whether filmed in the wilderness or in a carefully managed environment designed to reflect natural conditions. Another concern has been the carbon footprint of large wildlife productions. These documentaries often require teams to travel across the world, which increases emissions, something that seems at odds with environmental messaging. Critics have questioned how much travel is necessary. In response, production teams have made efforts to offset emissions, use fewer flights, and adopt newer tools that reduce environmental impact. Even with these efforts, the issue remains complicated. Showing the global effects of climate change often requires filming in many different locations, and that reality can't always be avoided. Attenborough rarely reacts to criticism directly. Instead, he lets scientific evidence speak for itself. His focus has always been on making environmental issues clear and understandable without turning them into arguments. But holding that role of being the trusted voice of nature comes with real pressure. And as he moved into his late 90s, concerns about his health began to weigh on him. Health issues. As David Attenborough entered his late 80s and 90s, the physical strain of his life's work began to show in ways that even he couldn't ignore. For decades, he had pushed his body through demanding environments, climbing cliffs, walking deserts, diving into oceans, and traveling across continents. However, eventually age caught up with him and the signs appeared slowly but unmistakably. One of the most significant moments came in 2013 when he was 87 years old. Doctors had to fit him with a pacemaker to stabilize his heart rhythm. The device helped control irregular beats and reduce the risk of sudden complications. It was a serious medical step that reminded everyone, including Attenborough himself, that he was no longer the young explorer who could move endlessly from one remote location to the next. Yet, even with the weight of the procedure and the recovery it required, he returned to work quickly, showing how deeply he valued his mission. But as he moved further into his 90s, another health challenge has become harder to ignore. Attenborough has spoken openly about his struggle with memory lapses, which makes him occasionally forget names or small details while filming. This was a normal sign of aging. But for someone responsible for explaining complex natural processes with precision, it was harder to deal with. He worried about how these lapses might affect the quality of his narration and his ability to guide viewers through scientific stories with accuracy. Even when the lapses were minor, the concern stayed with him. Sadly, age also began to touch his voice. The tool that made him recognizable around the world. The soft, measured tone that defined generations of documentaries gradually grew weaker with time. His breath support changed. The pace of his delivery slowed, and the once effortless clarity now required careful attention. Producers had to adjust their schedules to allow for more breaks, and recording sessions that once took an afternoon could stretch into days. But Attenborough approached these changes calmly, understanding that age shapes everyone in different ways. Despite all of these challenges, Attenborough continued working into his late 90s, filming new series, recording narration, and appearing in environmental campaigns. Each project required more effort than the one before. Yet he refused to step back. What kept him moving wasn't ambition or ego. Music, was purpose. He had spent decades witnessing the rapid changes in the natural world. And he felt a responsibility to communicate those changes as clearly as possible. But with every passing year, the gap between his will and his physical limits grew wider. Traveling became harder. Long filming days tested his stamina. Even simple tasks demanded more focus. His body was slowing down even as his sense of duty remained sharp. What made this stage of his life especially difficult was the public expectation placed on him. Attenborough wasn't just a filmmaker anymore. He had become a global symbol of environmental truth. People looked to him for guidance and authority. But behind the scenes, he was an aging man working through very human worries. The fear of losing memory, the strain of weaker breath, and the reality of heart problems. These private experiences didn't diminish his dedication, but they added a quieter emotional layer to his later work. Viewers noticed that his narration carried more reflection, more softness, and sometimes the faint tremor of someone who understood he was entering the final moments of his life. And as he continued working through his 90s, he began speaking more openly about something he had rarely addressed throughout his long career: his own mortality and the heartbreaking reflections that come with knowing his time is limited. Heartbreaking reflections on mortality. By the time David Attenborough reached 98 and 99, he began speaking more openly about aging than ever before. After a lifetime of traveling, filming, and pushing through demanding work schedules, he finally acknowledged that he was moving into the last chapter of his life. While promoting Ocean in 2025, he admitted he knew he was nearing the end. This confession surprised people, especially because he rarely talked about himself this way. For decades, he kept the spotlight on nature, not on his personal life. But at nearly 100 years old, he finally allowed people to see a bit more of what aging felt like for him. Loneliness has been one of the hardest parts. After his wife passed in 1997, Attenborough continued working nonstop. But in old age, the quiet moments at home have become more noticeable. His children live independent lives. And although they remain close to him, they have their own families and responsibilities. Long stretches of time between visits sometimes leave him feeling isolated, especially after returning from long filming trips. Even so, he's never used age as a reason to step back. He kept filming well into his late 90s and stayed involved in environmental campaigns, always pushing forward. And when he talked about the future, he focused on younger generations, the people who would inherit the planet he'd spent his life documenting. Attenborough has begun speaking about oceans, wildlife, and shrinking habitats with a new level of urgency. He had seen the damage happen up close over 7 decades, and he knew that the next steps belonged to those who would outlive him. The message was simple. Protecting the planet mattered more now than ever. In an interview, he said, "When I first saw the sea as a young boy, it was thought of as a vast wilderness to be tamed and mastered for the benefit of humanity. Now that I'm nearing the end of my life, we know the reverse is true. Our world will be saved if we save the sea. Nothing is more significant, I'm convinced, after a lifetime of documenting our world." He has maintained a pragmatic perspective, avoiding lengthy speeches or tearful farewells. He wanted people to realize how much more could be done to save our world, why it matters, and what is happening to it. Reflections by Attenborough are not about the past. Making ensuring the world looks forward is their goal. He is still committed to the same goal he began, showing people the earth and telling them that it cannot defend itself, even at the age of 100. Do you agree with David Attenborough? Post your responses in the space provided for comments below. Please remember to like this video, subscribe to our channel for future updates, and click on the next video that appears on your screen if you like this one.